524 people were in the air over Japan when the back of their airplane tore off. It was a Boeing 747, 12 minutes into an evening flight from Tokyo to Osaka, climbing through a clear summer sky. Then a sound like a cannon went off behind the passengers' heads. The cabin filled with white fog and oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling up in the cockpit. 3 men felt the jet shudder and slew sideways, and the controls went loose in their hands. What they could not see was that most of their tail fin had just broken away and fallen toward the ocean. Every hydraulic line in the airplane had been cut with it, all 4 systems gone in about a second. On a jumbo jet, the hydraulics are the muscles. They move the rudder, the elevators, the wing surfaces, everything a pilot uses to point the airplane where it needs to go. Without them, the control yoke and the foot pedals do almost nothing at all. So these 3 men were now holding the controls of a fully loaded 747 that would no longer obey them. They did not know the tail was gone. They only knew the airplane was hurt and drifting and packed with families. For the next 32 minutes, they would try to fly it with the only thing they had left: the engines, 2 under each wing, and nothing else. This is the story of that half hour, and of the quiet, 7-year-old mistake that made it happen. The date was the 12th of August, 1985. In Japan, it was the middle of Obon, the week when much of the country travels home. People go back to their parents' towns, tend the family graves, and sit with relatives they see once a year. So Japan Airlines Flight 123 was full, nearly every seat taken. 509 passengers, and 15 crew businessmen heading home from Tokyo, grandmothers, and a lot of children. Some families had booked the early evening flight, so the kids could sleep in their own beds that night. The airplane was a 747C, a version Boeing, built specially for the short, crowded domestic routes in Japan. It could carry more than 500 people on a hop that lasted under an hour. This particular jet had been flying since 1974, 11 years old, which is not old for a jumbo. It was well kept. There was nothing on its record to worry anyone. The captain that evening was a 49-year-old veteran named Masami Takahama. He had thousands of hours in big jets, and tonight he was also acting as an instructor. The man actually flying the airplane was his first officer, Yutaka Sasaki, 39. Sasaki was training to become a captain himself, and this leg was part of that training. He sat in the right seat with his hands on the yoke. While Takahama watched and coached from the left, behind them sat the flight engineer Hiroshi Fukuda, 46. His job was the airplane systems. The fuel, the pressurization, the hydraulics, all the gauges. The pilots had no time to watch. 3 experienced men, doing an ordinary thing, on an airplane they had every reason to trust. Takeoff was normal, the climb was normal. The seatbelt sign went off, and the cabin crew stood up to begin the service. Down the back, in an aisle seat, sat a young woman named Yumi Ochiai. She was a Japan Airlines flight attendant herself, but tonight she was off duty, flying home as a passenger. Remember her because she lived through what came next, and almost everyone around her did not. To understand what tore the tail off that evening, you have to go back 7 years to a hard landing. On the 2nd of June 1978, this same airplane came down too steeply onto a runway in Osaka. Its tail struck the ground. Pilots call it a tail strike, and on its own it is not unusual, but it damaged something deep inside the back of the airplane called the aft pressure bulkhead. That bulkhead is one of the most important pieces of metal on a jet, and most passengers have never heard of it. Think of the cabin as a sealed can, pumped full of pressurized air so people can breathe high above the earth. The pressure bulkhead is the rear wall of that can, a big curved dome of aluminum sealing off the tail. Every flight it holds the pressure in, every landing the pressure comes off again. Push, release, push, release. After the tail strike, the damaged bulkhead had to be repaired, and Boeing sent its own technicians to do it. The correct repair was very specific. 1 continuous plate, fixed across the joint with several rows of rivets. That shared the strain, so no single line of rivet holes would carry the whole load by itself. That is not what got built. Instead of 1 continuous plate, the technicians fitted 2 separate pieces, and the way they joined them left the critical seam held by a single row of rivets. On paper, it looked repaired. The airplane went back into service and flew for years. But that 1 row of rivets now carried far more stress than the design had ever allowed. Engineers later worked out that the joint had roughly 70% of the strength it was supposed to have. Every flight, thousands of times over, the pressure pushed against it and let go. Somewhere in that row of rivet holes a crack began, tiny and invisible, and with every flight it grew. Metal that flexes over and over will eventually tear. It is called fatigue, and it is patient. The flawed repair was only ever going to survive so many flights before it failed. By August of 1985, this airplane had flown well past that point. It had made the trip thousands of times, and the whole while the crack had been spreading across the bulkhead. Nobody knew. There was no warning light for this, no gauge, nothing on any checklist. The airplane looked perfect from the outside, and it was already in a sense doomed. On the evening of the 12th of August, it pushed back from the gate at Tokyo's Haneda airport, filled to the doors. The crack in the back of the airplane had one flight left to grow. At 12 minutes past 6, Flight 123 lifted off and turned south toward Osaka. For 12 minutes everything was routine. The jet leveled toward its cruising height out over the bay south of Tokyo, the evening light turning gold in the windows. Then, at about 24 minutes past 6, the crack finished its work. The weakened bulkhead let go all at once. The pressurized air, trapped in the cabin, blasted backward through the broken wall and into the tail. That surge of air was more than the tail structure could hold. Burst the tail from the inside, and most of the vertical fin tore away and fell into the sky behind them. In the cockpit, the crew heard it as a single heavy bang from somewhere behind them. The cabin decompressed in an instant. Fog, falling masks, a roar of wind, and the stab of pressure in everyone's ears on the flight recorder. Seconds after the bang, the flight engineer's voice reports the thing that decided everything. The hydraulic pressure was dropping. Then it was gone. All four systems bleeding out through the torn lines where the tail used to be. Takahama took hold of the controls alongside Sasaki, but now there was almost nothing to fly with. The yoke moved. The airplane barely answered. They pulled to lift the nose, and the jet responded in slow motion, if it responded at all. The cruelest part is that the crew never fully understood what had happened to them. They knew the hydraulics were gone, and they declared an emergency within moments of the bang, but they never knew the tail was missing. They spent the whole flight fighting to save an airplane that was no longer the shape they pictured in their minds. With no hydraulics, the 747 began to do something strange and frightening. It started to rise and fall in long, slow waves, climbing for maybe 45 seconds, then sinking for another 45. Pilots call this a phugoid, and normally the controls settle it in seconds. Now, nothing settled it. The airplane rose and fell in 90-second swells, and the crew could only ride them on top of that. It began to roll and yaw at once, wallowing from side to side like a boat in a heavy sea. That motion is called a Dutch roll, and with no rudder there was no clean way to stop it, so Takahama reached for the only levers that still did anything, the throttles. 4 engines, 2 under each wing. Push the left engines harder than the right, and the airplane slowly swings right. Push the right harder, and it swings left. Ease all 4 back, and the nose sinks. Feed all 4 forward, and after a long pause, the nose floats up. It is like steering a car by tapping the gas with a 10-second delay on every move. On a road you cannot see, no airline pilot is trained for this. There is no procedure for it in any manual. There was barely a belief that it could be done at all, and yet for more than half an hour, these 3 men did it. They kept the crippled jumbo jet more or less upright, using nothing but the push of its engines. Back in the cabin, the passengers knew something was badly wrong, though not how wrong. The masts were down, the airplane was heaving up and down, and tilting one way then the other. Yumi Ochiai watched the working crew try to calm people and pass along instructions. Passengers were told to tighten their belts, fit their masks, and bend down over their knees. When the descent came, it was not steady. It came in those same sickening waves. Some passengers were quiet. Some were sick. Some prayed. And in those long minutes, a few people did the thing people do when they believe they are going to die. They reached for pens, on the backs of tickets, in the margins of books, in small notebooks. Some passengers began writing to the people they loved, a word to a wife, instructions about the children, small ordinary things set down in a hurry. Some wrote in steady, careful handwriting, even as the airplane rolled and dropped around them. They did not know any more than the pilots did exactly what had broken. They only knew the airplane was falling in slow motion towards something, and that there was time to say goodbye. What stays with people about Flight 123 is how quiet those minutes were, and how many aboard spent them thinking of someone else. Up front, the crew was still fighting for every one of them. They wanted a runway. Any runway at all. They tried to turn the airplane back toward Tokyo, toward a big airport they had left less than half an hour before, but turning was agony. Every input took 10 or 20 seconds to do anything, and often did the opposite of what they wanted. The jet would begin a turn, and then keep rolling past the point where they meant to stop. They caught it and leveled it with the throttles, overshooting one way, then the other. Behind them, Fukuda worked the problem, calling out speeds and heights and trying to lower the landing gear. They put the gear down, partly hoping it would slow the jet and steady it in the air. It helped a little, not enough. Slowly, without anyone choosing it, the airplane was being carried inland, away from the coast and the flat ground and the runways ahead of it. In the gathering dark stood the mountains of Gunma, northwest of Tokyo. Ridge after ridge of steep forested peaks, some of them nearly a mile high. The worst possible place for an airplane that could barely climb and could not steer. In the years since, other crews have tried to fly the very same failure in simulators. Many of them lost control within minutes. This crew held on for more than 30, but the mountains were rising toward them, and the airplane was sinking into them. In the last few minutes, the slow waves and rolls grew wilder. The crew was worn down, arms and minds spent from half an hour of fighting a machine that would not settle. The ground was climbing to meet them now, black peaks against a darkening sky. The cockpit warning system began to call out, a flat mechanical voice repeating one command: pull up! Pull up! They were pulling up. They had been pulling up for 30 minutes. There was nothing left to pull. The right wing dropped. The airplane rolled hard and started down on the recorder in the last seconds. The captain says a few short words, translated from the Japanese. They come out as something close to, "This is the end." At around 6:56 in the evening, the 747 struck a forested ridge near Mount Takamagahara in the mountains of Gunma. The place is known as Osutaka Ridge. More than 1,500 meters up, far from any road, the airplane hit the trees and the rock at high speed and broke apart. From the first bang over the bay to the mountain, about 32 minutes had passed. 32 minutes is not long. It is about the length of a sitcom episode or a slow drive home. 3. For the people on Flight 123, it was all the time they had, and the crew spent every second of it trying to save them. 520 of the 524 people on board were killed. It is still the deadliest accident involving a single airplane in the history of flight. And yet 4 people somehow were still alive on that mountain. Here the story takes its cruelest turn. The crash happened in the evening in rough country as the light was going. Rescue teams did not reach the site that night. The wreckage lay high on a steep ridge, miles from the nearest road, in thick forest and darkness. Tirpased the burning site from above, but rescuers on foot did not climb up to it until the next morning. That was roughly 14 to 16 hours after the airplane came down. And in those hours, on that cold mountainside, not everyone who had survived the crash was already gone. We know this because of Yumi Ochiai. She had been thrown badly hurt into a pocket of wreckage near the back of the airplane, and she lived from where she lay in the dark. She later said she could hear other people, voices, and movement. A child's voice, and a woman answering it. She heard a young boy, and she believed his mother alive somewhere near her in the night. And through the long hours, she heard those sounds around her grow fewer, and then stop. People who had lived through the impossible, the blowout, the fall, the crash, died in the hours that followed, waiting for help that was still climbing toward them. How many might have been saved by a faster rescue, no one can say for certain. It is one of the hardest questions this disaster left behind, and it changed how Japan prepares for the next one. When rescuers finally reached the ridge the next morning, they found a field of wreckage and almost no one alive. 4 survivors. All of them female. All of them seated in the same part of the airplane, the rear left of the cabin. Yumi Ochiai was one. Another was a woman named Hiroko Yoshizake, and beside her, her 8-year-old daughter, Mikiko. Mother and daughter, both alive, pulled from the broken tail section together. The fourth was a 12-year-old girl named Keikoka Wakami. found up in a tree thrown there by the crash. 4 people out of 524. All from the one corner of the airplane that held together. Where you happened to sit that evening was the difference between living and dying. The survivors would carry the weight of that for the rest of their lives. So would the families of everyone who did not come home. In the days that followed, thousands of people came to the foot of the mountain, and a long, painful recovery began, and the country started asking the only question that mattered. Why? The answer led investigators back 7 years to that hard landing in Osaka, and the repair no one had thought about, since they carried the wreckage of the aft pressure bulkhead off the mountain and studied it piece by piece. And there it was, the bad repair, 2 separate plates, where there should have been one, a single row of rivets, where there should have been several fatigue cracks spreading out from those rivet holes. Exactly the way weakened metal cracks, the bulkhead had failed at roughly 70% strength, just as the flaw joint had doomed it to. When it let go, it took the tail and all 4 hydraulic systems with it, in the space of a heartbeat, a tail strike in 1978. To repair done wrong, 7 years of cracks that no one could see. That was the chain that ended on Osutaka Ridge. Boeing accepted responsibility for the repair its technicians had carried out. The airline was gutted by shame in a way that is hard to explain from outside Japan. Its president, Yasuo Takahama, resigned. A maintenance manager and an engineer connected to the case were later so consumed by it that they took their own lives. The grief did not stay inside the cabin of that airplane. It spread outward. For years out of it, though, came change. The way airlines inspect pressure bulkheads and pass repairs was tightened around the world. Rescue services in Japan had to face how long it had taken to reach that ridge and what the delay had cost. And the idea that a jet could lose all of its hydraulics at once, long treated as almost impossible, was taken seriously at last. In later years, when other crews faced their own loss of control, the hard lessons from this flight were part of what they had to work with. But rules and inspections are not why people in Japan still remember Flight 123. Every August, families climb the path up Osutaka Ridge to the place where the airplane came down. They leave flowers and water and small toys at markers scattered through the forest. Some of them have been making that climb for 40 years. They climb for the passengers who wrote goodbye notes with steady hands, and for the crew who fought a hopeless airplane for 32 minutes and never gave up on the people behind them. Captain Takahama, First Officer Sasaki, and Flight Engineer Fukuda did not save their airplane. What they did was refuse to stop flying it, long after most crews would have lost control, and that is why they are remembered. The crack that killed them all began years earlier, in a quiet hangar with a repair that looked finished, and was not. That is the part worth holding on to. The disaster did not start with a bang over the bay. It started with a shortcut that no passenger ever saw, rowing in the dark, one flight at a time. If the last 32 minutes of Flight 123 stayed with you, follow along, and I'll take you inside the next forgotten disaster.